Hello and welcome to the Responsive Family Sleep Podcast. I'm your host, Kim Hawley, holistic sleep coach, lactation consultant, peaceful parenting educator, and mom. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by all the conflicting sleep info, frustrated with sleep information that just plain felt wrong, or searched desperately for a truly gentle and responsive sleep approach, then you are in the right place. In each episode, we'll be answering your most pressing baby and toddler sleep questions, busting those sleep myths, and helping you understand truly developmental, biologically normal baby and toddler sleep, plus encouraging you to trust your intuition along the way. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome back to the podcast. On this episode, we are going to be troubleshooting tricky, stressful, long, frustrating bedtimes. And I talk with so many parents who find bedtime is just hard, right? And it doesn't look or feel like what they want it to look or feel like. They want a peaceful bedtime, a bedtime full of connection, a bedtime that feels like cozy and loving and wonderful, and they're just not seeing that play out in their bedtimes, and that's hard, right? And so I just want to, acknowledge that bedtimes or evenings in general can be a really tricky time of day for a lot of families, and that's because we're all kind of low on cope by the end of the day, Your little baby toddler, they've had a whole day of cumulative experiences that can kind of add up, right? They either really met their needs well or really didn't meet their needs well throughout the day. And same with you, right? You either had a day that really kind of met your needs, that was in good balance, and you're feeling good headed into the evening, or you didn't, right? So I all have low cope. We're all kind of experiencing the day catching up with us. And then we have an evening that we need to get through in a way that feels good. And that can be hard. So when we're thinking about, okay, our bedtime is hard. It's stressful. It's frustrating. It feels like a battle. Nothing seems to be working. I find that there are three big kind of broad areas or factors or sort of buckets that we can think of that most bedtime issues tend to fall into. And those are sleep timing issues, so like mismatches and how the sleep timings are playing out. Regulation struggles, right? We're just not in a regulated state in the way that we need to be moving through the evening. And then connection challenges or separation challenges are kind of two ways actually of looking at the same thing there. So those are like the three big areas. And within those areas, there's lots of going on, right? There's lots of moving pieces, and there's a lot that is individual, right? So we're talking about general trends here versus, individualized sort of analysis of what's going on. But I really hope that this gives you some food for thought and some different ways of looking at what's going on with your bedtimes and how sort of look at the big picture as well as sort of narrow down on specific points in your routines and hopefully giving you some ideas to troubleshoot. And of course, I'm here if you want to reach out and get more support applying, these ideas. So we have these three main areas. Now let's sort of unpack them a bit. And I'm going to give you some things that I look at when I am working with a family that's struggling a lot with their bedtime. So sleep timings, right? It's a couple things that are good to know here. And one is that we only need so much sleep in 24 hours. Two is that how that sleep is distributed can make a difference in how bedtimes go and how sleep is at night. And three is some littles have a strong circadian rhythm and preferred bedtime. And some don't. And it is much more about how that sleep is distributed. So some seem to be really circadian rhythm driven around bedtime. And some seem to be more sleep pressure driven around bedtime. So the spacing between the nap and bedtime. And some is a little of both. So that's just an observational thing. I don't know that that's really an evidence-based concept, but I do find that it can be really true for some kiddos. So when we have sleep timing mismatches, we are not heading into bedtime at an optimal time and with optimal sleep pressure. And that can be because bedtime is too early, right? We're so culturally obsessed with these early bedtimes, and we aren't taught to think about them in context or if it actually matches your baby's sleep needs. So if your baby is more of a night owl and you're trying to get them to bed at 7, you might be struggling, right? My oldest, such a little night owl baby. I mean, not as extreme as I've seen now as a sleep coach, but he has always naturally gone to bed later. And it is always a bit of a struggle and something we have to stay on top of for him to be going to bed at a time that makes sense for when he has to get up for school. I mean, he's 12, almost 13 now. And I mean, that's been something we have to stay on top of always with him. But as a baby, he happily went to bed at 9:30. That was great for him. So had we tried to put him to bed early, right, we probably would have struggled a lot because his body naturally was set to a bit later. And this can be true, right? We can head into bedtime not in a good place, not just because of when bedtime is, like how late or early, but if your last nap went really late and really long, right? So if we're like, okay, our baby always goes to bed at 8:30, but sometimes we're letting them to nap till 6:30 when their body really needs maybe, 3.5, 4 hours ahead of bedtime, but sometimes trying to put them to sleep after 2.5 hours, they're not tired enough, right? And so that can be an issue. If we're thinking about how much time have they been awake? How much sleep pressure are they building? What's going on with those naps? Are they setting us up for a tired child? And then sort of the flip side to that is if they've been awake way too long, right? We might be seeing a child that can't fall asleep, or bedtime, they're kind of bouncing all over the place. They're hyper, they're wired, they're fussy, they're upset. That can happen when they've been awake way longer than their body ideally should be. And they just got this second wind and they're kind of manic and, can't regulate themselves. They can't actually relax into sleep, right? Now, we're going to talk about the regulation piece in more detail in just a minute, but that can be a sleep timing issue as well, right? So basically, if we're not roughly where our kiddo needs to be as far as how the naps are spread, when bedtime is, we're going to struggle more because they are physiologically not set up for as good a bedtime. So regulation, right? I just mentioned regulation with being awake too long. Now let's kind of dig into that a bit more, right? So in order to sleep at bedtime, right, you need to be able to relax. So we need the nervous system to calm down, to relax, to settle down, to be able to let go and go into sleep. And so there are so many ways that we can sort of be at some tension here, be at some mismatch, have our little with a nervous system that's super amped up and they're not able to relax, right? They're not able to down-regulate into sleep. So I just mentioned with being awake too long, right? That second wind, that being awake. And this happens a lot when we aren't getting good enough naps or we're in the process of dropping a nap. So, if you've been through dropping a nap, right, where they've been on 3 naps, but you're starting to skip the 3rd nap, you just cannot get them down. And then all of a sudden they had 2 naps, but the second one was like early afternoon and they've been awake way too long. And they've been awake too long, right? But we can also see this in subtle ways where we just have too early of a nap and we're going too long till bedtime, but it looks like they're fine. But they are actually kind of hyper and wild because of that second wind. So something to look at that we have to look in the big picture context. Are they dysregulated, kind of hyper, or, are they actually not tired, right? So we kind of have to look at the big picture there. Another piece that I see all the time, is that your evening routine, your bedtime routine is actually amping them up instead of calming them down. And I see this through too many transitions, too much high energy, too close to sleep, doing things that are stressful, too close to sleep, right? A whole bunch of things that could be amping them up at a time of night when we need to calm them down. So we really need to think about, is our bedtime routine doing what it is supposed to do? And another big piece of regulation heading into bedtime is about, did they get enough movement and stimulation throughout the day and in the earlier evening? So if we didn't move a lot that day, it might be really hard for your kiddo's body to relax at bedtime because they didn't get their movement needs met. They were understimulated, and that's catching up to them, right? I see this with families who are so leaning into the calm concept that their entire last wake window, no matter if we're talking about, a 3 or 4 month old or a 12-month-old, right? Their whole last wake window is calm. And they just didn't get to move, right? And so we're seeing them having trouble winding down at bedtime. So when we think about, did they get the right amount of activity, stimulation, movement throughout the day, right? That's going to impact their regulation headed into bedtime and the ability of their nervous system to relax. So obviously lots of nuance and play there to experiment with. And now our last big category is around connection, or I said sort of the flip of that is separation. And why did I say that first, right? Well, we need to feel connected, to feel safe, to be able to relax and to sleep, right? And sleep is separation, even if we're talking about contact sleep, because we're separating from consciousness. We are not aware, right? We're letting go of our awareness of the world. And certainly it's separation if we're talking about a baby sleeping in their own sleep space, sleeping in their own room, all that kind of stuff. So in order to buffer against separation, we need more connection, right? Forcing separation makes kids anxious. It doesn't actually help them separate better. Kiddos need to feel close to us to cope with separation. And so our evenings, the priority really needs to be connection. And so sometimes we have major bedtime issues because we're having connection issues. And I don't mean this in you're not parenting well, there's major problems sort of ways. I mean just the little day-to-day natural disconnections that happen. That can happen when we've been really busy, or we're rushing a lot, or we're feeling really like we're trying to pack way too much into too little time. When we don't take time to reconnect after a day apart, where the only time in the evening that they are getting the undivided attention is the bedtime routine, because that's too short. We have to back it up, and we need to be looking way ahead of the bedtime routine to start building that connection, right? We don't want to just start thinking about connection with the bedtime routine. We need to start earlier in the evening. Now, another sort of contextual factor that's a little bit harder to troubleshoot for is separation anxiety. And this is really common in the older baby months, also really common in toddlerhood. We tend to have peaks, and a lot of kids have more than one peak of separation anxiety in the early years. And so if you're having separation anxiety struggles, that can just make bedtime a bit harder and mean you need to be maybe a bit more strategic about what you're doing. And separation anxiety is generally a developmental thing, unless we have some additional stressors or things going on that could be making it worse. But generally we're talking about normal developmental experience. And so we can't necessarily strategize our way out of that, though there are ways, to support it. But separation anxiety is just a little bit of context there, right? If you know that is a struggle for your kiddo, see what you can do to support them with that. And then another piece of connection and separation that we don't often identify as parents is when are we emotionally present during bedtime, or are we really mentally and emotionally checked out? And I don't say this to call anyone out or to make you feel bad or guilty. Good Lord, we have enough of that already, right? What I'm saying is that kiddos can sense that, and some much more than others. And so it is natural to let your mind wander, or to be looking ahead to what you have to do after bedtime, or to be thinking about your own things. That happens, and the more that we can be fully present with them, the easier it is for them to relax and to sleep. And so this is one for some self-reflection, like where are you at? Is there anything you can do to help you be a little bit more present during your evening routine in order to help your little relax a bit more to sleep? And what kind of impact does that have on them? Because I have seen some kiddos where this alone makes a night and day difference. And of course, I've seen others where it's not, they're not as attuned to that, right? Kind of depends on their temperament and how attuned to emotional changes they are, right? These are lots of broad areas, lots of big topics, lots of things to look at when we're thinking about what can we do with bedtimes. How do we get bedtimes back on track? And so I hope you found this helpful and like a good list of things to think about and places to experiment rather than overwhelming. But if it does feel overwhelming, because it is a lot of moving pieces, I'm here. Reach out. I'd love to help you. Troubleshoot your bedtimes. It's a really fun area to see how can we get this going smoother. How can we bring in ideas and strategies and look at the whole picture and put all the pieces together and set you up for a more peaceful and smoother and more efficient bedtime process. So bedtime can be a time that is full of connection and full of love and full of snuggles and peace and all that. And it's also normal to struggle. So just to normalize that, like, it's okay. It doesn't mean you failed or you did anything wrong or anything like that. It's simply a fact that life is busy. There are a lot of demands on our times. Our kids' needs change as they grow. And when bedtime's feeling out of whack, sometimes we just need to do some troubleshooting and reflect at some of the common pieces that can, impact how bedtime goes. Thank you for joining me today. I hope this episode left you feeling more informed, confident, and encouraged on your sleep journey. And just a reminder before you go that nothing in this episode is individualized to your specific sleep situation, nor is it to be taken as medical advice. Take what resonates, ignore what doesn't, and check with your healthcare provider about any medical concerns. Take a moment to subscribe to this podcast so that you'll never miss an episode. And take a moment to rate, review, or share an episode you love on social media. All of that helps parents just like you find me, this podcast, and this gentle and responsive sleep information. I'll see you next time.